either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris. Grandmama, this week we watched Anastasia.
Grandmama, this is a story of dead people.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Confirmed 100% dead now.
Not according to the church. The church disagrees with you.
Okay.
We'll get to there. Anyway, this week we watched the originally Don Bluth 1997 animated film Anastasia, which for a lot of American children was their first introduction to Russia.
Yes, I remember this came out when I was still living in Alaska, and I don't...
Alaska's a good place to watch this movie.
Mm-hmm. No, it was great because, if I remember right, it came out in winter.
Even better!
So, I don't remember seeing much about it. I know I saw it. My mom remembers that we saw it.
Yes.
We might have seen it in theaters, but what I remember more so are the Burger King toys.
Oh yeah, there were Burger King toys for this one.
Specifically, the only one I remember was Rasputin's reliquary. It had a string attached to it and had like one of those helicopter things that spun off of it.
Ooh, fancy.
It's my only childhood memories of this movie, really.
I liked this movie a lot as a kid, but we didn't own it. Mm-hmm. And so unless we had it on VHS tape, I didn't like obsessively watch it. So there was that hitch in the road until high school age. And then I had friends who owned it and like we watched it every time we were together. And then college hit and there was like a weird collective remembrance of this film in college. And so we all just watched it a whole bunch again in college because we all like vaguely remembered this movie. It's
one of those movies that, if I remember, it was moderately successful in the box office.
Yeah, like it did okay.
But it was home video.
Oh, yeah,
that really brought it out.
Well, and unfortunately, that's kind of the Don Bluth trend.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, I think, hands down, Don Bluth's most recognizable movie. Not necessarily for his style, because this is nothing like the rest of his movies style-wise. This is much more Disney-fied looking, but everyone has seen Anastasia. Not everyone's gotten around to Secrets of NIMH.
Which I haven't either, but...
You would like Secrets of NIMH so much more than Anastasia. But I picked this one.
Yes.
So, but very brief background, because despite this being a Don Bluth film, it doesn't hold a lot of the Don Bluth characteristics. So while this is one of his movies, we're going to talk about him a little less. But quick summary, he was a former employee of Disney's, and then decided that he wanted to do his own thing, so he started his own company. Long story short, we get the Don Bluth animation studio. He makes several movies, including things like All Dogs Go to Heaven, this one, Secrets of NIMH.
Well, from what I found, his studio only made like 2-3 movies, and then it went bankrupt.
Yes.
And then, so, like, Anastasia was brought about because he started working with Fox.
Yeah, Fox bought them, and now that Disney owns Fox, Disney now re-owns Don Bluth.
Okay. That explains how Disney got it, because I remember seeing these movies coming up on Disney Plus, and...
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of the appeal to the more hardcore Don Bluth fans was because he wasn't Disney. He could touch on subjects a little bit more heavy-handed than Disney normally would have.
Yeah.
Anastasia's not a great example of that, just because this was more a mainstream film for him. But, like, Secrets of NIMH talked about death a lot more than I think Disney would normally have talked about. He's a little bit more comfortable with using dark, scary imagery in his children's films.
Well...
He pushed the box a little bit more and still kept it kid-friendly.
I will say he did make a very light movie on a
very heavy-handed
very
subject.
Heavy and horrible time in history.
Yes, and he did so successfully that I think I think it's more common knowledge now, but when a lot of us were growing up, even through high school, I think a lot of people assumed that Anastasia was more historically correct than it actually is. And by actually is, I mean it isn't at all.
Yeah, no. And they even mentioned that like Anastasia in the movie is 18, I think.
She's got to be old enough for it not to be creepy.
And not be in an orphanage anymore.
Yeah, which, I mean, back when the movie's set, what age would that be in Russia? I don't know. I feel like 18 might be a little high, but...
in the real world, if Anastasia was still alive, she would have been 28.
Sure.
When the movie's set, at least.
Well, and, there's other little things here and there that we'll get into, but it is I appreciate that Disney has made it more accessible to find the Don Bluth films, because they are really great. A lot of us grew up with, I think my favorite one is American Tail or Fievel Goes West, all of that series. I loved that series. They were kind of hard to get a hold of until, unfortunately, Disney bought him, which defeats the points of Don Bluth. That was his whole gig, was he's not Disney. But,
yeah,
we are now in the world of monopolies, so here we are. But it does mean that we can watch Anastasia much more easily.
And so for a quick refresher before we actually deep dive into everything, the movie Anastasia is based off the myth that one of the Romanov children lived after being executed or escaped execution.
Yes.
And it was commonly believed that it was Anastasia who escaped. And so that's the core of this movie. And on top of that, Rasputin is...
the bad guy for this film.
He's the bad guy, and his curse is continuing on through her still being alive. Yes. And it's her it's more about her trying to find her grandmother, or find who she is, with Rasputin kind of being in the background.
He's a little bit in the way.
Yes.
I will say that, especially as far as children's movies go, this one handles the desire to find family a little bit more maturely than I think other films do, which is a nice breath of fresh air. But if you're a history buff, just turn that right on off. Because when I told you we were doing this one, you immediately jumped into Rasputin history.
Yes.
And you listened to a 3-part podcast by our overlords, the
last podcast on the left.
Yes, who undoubtedly have inspired us quite a lot.
And immediately after that went into starting hardcore history's blueprints to Armageddon. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and then unfortunately learned that Rasputin's in this all of like 10 minutes.
Well, I realized that so I watched the movie before I went into listening to the podcast, and
it's a great podcast if you guys haven't listened to it.
Exactly.
It's very in-depth.
It was just an excuse to re-listen to Rasputin.
It is a very entertaining, full breakdown of Rasputin. But unfortunately, Rasputin. But unfortunately, like the bad guy in the movie Anastasia and the real life man share almost no similarities other than the beard, and even the beard's a little fishy.
Yeah, well, no, because Rasputin didn't have he had a beard, but it wasn't like super long, like.
It wasn't the gremlin beard that animated Rasputin has.
Yeah.
The only other thing that they did get right, which was a fun detail, was there is talk that Rasputin did fall in a river as part of his death.
Yes.
A lot of things happened to make him die, but that was one of them. So that was a nice little throwback.
Yes. We'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
So, a little bit more about Don Bluth, because I didn't realize how somewhat influential he is as not only an animator, but like as a video game designer. He wasn't a video game designer. He animated Dragon's Lair.
Yes, he did.
And they're making I think they're making a live action of it now, or
that'd be cool. I'd be down for that.
They're making a movie of it. That's all I know.
I think that'd be cool. It was a pretty neat game setup.
Yeah, and so as an offshoot of Disney, it's interesting to see someone actually break away from them and start their own thing.
And do so rather arguably successfully.
Yes. Because I think now he's a professor and just teaches about film and animation.
Okay, so I don't know if this is a weird thing that only I do, but because of elementary school schooling, I've always kind of assumed that once you stop caring about people, they're dead. So I had assumed, unfortunately, that Don Bluth had passed away at some point. And during my research, I found out that he is not dead.
He is very much alive. His brother did pass away in 2013, who he was also an animator and I think they mentioned a graphic designer for Disney.
Okay, so maybe I was thinking about him. Probably not. I just assume people are dead, but whoops, not dead. Which is kind of cool, though, because, it brings a fun perspective on his works, as he is, especially in the underground animation world, he's pretty highly revered. There's a lot of his works that people are truly in love with.
Yes. And honestly, this movie being released in 2007, the animation and the use of computer-generated graphics are...
I like it.
Honestly, they hold their own. Some of the animation, I feel like, especially the CGI, is a bit... There's moments of it being outdated. But I do appreciate the use of hand-painted textures.
Yes, it was a nice detail.
For the CGI.
It definitely made everything feel like it flowed together much more seamlessly than it could have. Were there certain shots in it that felt a little unnecessary? I'm thinking specifically of the staircase scene where the camera pans through a staircase.
Yeah.
Not necessary, but I could see how at the time it would have been a really cool shot to have included. And it's not distracting from the movie so much so that you're like, I gotta turn it off now.
Yeah.
It's in there. It's fine.
And I mean, I think they mentioned that at one point there's 1,000 animated characters on screen, which they said they couldn't do traditionally.
Yes.
To an extent, I agree. 1,000's a lot.
1,000's a lot.
But after just watching Akira and...
Yeah, Akira's another tier.
Oh, yeah.
It's a different tier. I will say, and this is something that even Akira didn't quite capture, but that's more the stylistic choice between these two movies, is especially in Disney Sona style movies, which Anastasia does have that same feel. It is hard to get background characters that look and feel like real people and distinct different people without having like one or two stand out. Whereas in Anastasia, while yes, there's a couple of kooky ones who do stand out a little bit more, everyone in the background does feel like a real person. Yeah. And they also actually feel like you're in Russia. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, that's also because they spent a lot of time researching. I will say one thing, this movie, despite being historically flawed...
Yeah, the Anastasia part's wrong, but the rest of it's spot on.
Oh yeah, it is amazing. They spent a week in Russia just shooting, taking pictures.
Yes. And it's details that you don't necessarily pick up on, especially as a kid. I didn't pick up on, but there is a specific coffee pot that was very popular in Russia at the time, and they bothered to animate the coffee pots to that specific style, which was a really nice touch because as an adult, it makes it feel like you're not in just a generic winter place. You're in a country.
Yes. And so, to really talk about the movie, we kind of have to go almost scene by scene for this one again.
We do. I don't think this is a spoiler, though, because this movie's been out for ages. If you haven't seen it yet, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. I mean...
It's been out long enough.
97. It's over 20 years old, so...
Yeah.
So how this movie starts off, it starts off rather grand.
It does, and it kind of vaguely reminds me of the intro scene to Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I appreciate because both of those are setting up this grand city. The only complaint I have is they continuously refer to the city as St. Petersburg, which it is currently known as. I don't think it was called St. Petersburg at the time that this would have been occurring, because it had a couple name changes. Granted, I am not a Russian historian, but I did find some disparities when I was researching that.
Yeah, I don't know either. But also at the time, they did have a party for, it was the 300th anniversary of the Romanov rule.
Yes, I think the movie gets the date off by 4 years or something, but good enough. Close enough. No one, especially American children, will not know.
Well, on top of that, from last podcast on the left, they're going to be one of my main sources for this episode, history-wise. They mentioned that it was more of a somber affair. Yeah. That the country wasn't doing very well. It wasn't as grand and glorious as the movie depicts it.
I will say that the real life Tsar, Nicholas II, who the movie and his family are based off of, it seems very much like he was born wrong time, wrong place. It sounds like he was a wonderful family man and was very devoted to his wife and his children. Mm-hmm. Horrible leader, is from what I can gather.
Yeah, it was mentioned a few times that if he had been born maybe a couple or 50, 100 years before, he would have done just fine.
He seemed like a very hands-off sort of guy. Mm-hmm. Didn't really want to be in the war room, which led to a lot of problems, especially mm-hmm. since we... and the movie does address this, and I think it addresses this in a smart but kid-friendly way. You do see the troubles that these normal people are having. They express their unrest. You do get to see them rioting against the palace, and while it's blamed upon this curse,
okay, so
maybe not necessarily accurate.
Yeah.
But...
So this part, Rasputin breaks into the party.
Oh, Rasputin!
I put a curse on your family.
Yes.
Well, he did kind of.
Yeah.
His curse was if one of your family members kills me, you guys won't live past a few years.
Yes.
And he was actually accurate in that.
He did have a lot of unfortunately correct predictions.
Yes.
Which I think was part of why he was... how he got how high he got.
Yeah. And one thing that's interesting, so for those of you who don't know, Rasputin got to his position. He almost had a stranglehold on the Romanov family because the queen or the Tsarina. I don't remember her actual name. The Tsarina at the time, she was very much into mysticism. The occult was in fashion in Russia.
And not just in Russia. This was a fairly worldwide phenomena of being in touch with the spirits. Was it as grandiose as I think Russia took it? Maybe mm-hmm. not. But, like, even America, we're no better. We were really into seances at the time.
Oh, yeah. Well... And as we know, their son Nikolai was a hemophiliac.
And there's even some evidence that maybe the other children also had some very poor health.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, medicine at the time, especially for hemophilia, was not science-driven.
Well, not science-driven, but what they think gave Rasputin his powers, and they don't think he actually knew this, but at the time, what's the painkiller? Aspirin was a
it was the wonder drug.
It was the wonder drug of the time.
Arguably still is.
And as a blood thinner for a hemophiliac, that's just horrible.
It's not good.
Well, Rasputin told them not to mess with the kid too much, and so because they weren't giving him aspirin, they think that's why he was doing just fine, because there were times when, like, they would say, hey, we need you to come to the palace, he's not doing so well. He would just say, tell the doctors not to mess with him, because Rasputin was a raging alcoholic and was too drunk to bother.
Yeah, I will say that Rasputin deserves his own show, so we won't go into him mm-hmm. too much in depth. But it is interesting to also note that, especially in the movie Anastasia, they paint Anastasia as the sole surviving heir to the throne, but not just that, but like she was the one to potentially be taking the throne. She was never in line to get the throne.
No.
Alexei, her younger brother, was supposedly next in line, and then because of his disease, I think his father decided to sidestep him and give it to his younger brother.
Nikolai the Tsar, that's right.
Yeah, Nikolai the Tsar.
Yeah.
So, arguably none of these kids would have been proper royalty, but it is a cute idea that Anastasia's a princess.
Yes, it is. So from here we have the revolt.
Yes.
The civil war that broke out in Russia, and this is where the movie really, I would say, starts.
Yes.
So they break in after Anastasia's been given a music box by her grandmama.
Her grandmama. Her grandmother, who is based off of her actual real grandmother, and I'm gonna say this name so wrong. Are you ready? Dragomira Empress Marie. I can say the Marie part.
Dragomira?
Dragomira?
I don't know.
I speak zero Russian.
Yes.
But from what I can find, like, that character building aspect is more or less close.
Mm-hmm.
I will also give her this. The grandmother's Russian accent is delightful.
Compared to some of the other accents. So, at this point, we're also introduced to Dmitri, who's a young servant who helps Anastasia escape.
Yes, and even as a young boy, he looks like he is from the hardened New York streets and has a bit of a New York accent.
John Cusack.
Hey.
Are
you looking at yourself in the mirror? Aren't you so cute?
Anywho, so as they're fleeing the castle, Anastasia and Grandmama, Rasputin descends upon them.
Yes,
and tries to kill them.
I will say that one of Don Bluth's strengths in storytelling is his use of color. And so this scene runs so quickly together that even though I watched this movie recently, it feels rushed, it feels hurried, but you don't miss any details. The coloring's really nice. It gives it a nice, dark, spooky atmosphere. You get that distinct green and black combo for Rasputin coming in, swooping in, being the bad guy. It's a nicely done, scary scene.
You say that, but the movie commentary, he and the other director, Gary Goldman, were bitching about the coloring the whole damn time.
Yes, they did. But I think it ended up working.
Yeah. So, at this point, Rasputin falls into the river, Anastasia along with him.
Kind of, there's some hazy parts to this part, which I appreciate because it does give the audience reason to also kind of not follow...
Question.
Yeah, not follow exactly what happens to her, which I think would give more questions than answers in the end, especially of I have forgotten my past sort of film.
And at the time, Grandmama, in real life, I don't think she was actually in Russia at the time.
No. She also wasn't a big fan of Paris. No. She really liked Denmark. But you know what? Yeah. Denmark doesn't have the same ring as Paris.
Oh, Paris.
Baguette. Exactly. While Denmark is an actually lovely city, as a child, I don't think Denmark would be high on my, recognizable lists.
No.
Especially at the time period that this movie's set in. So I get why they picked Paris.
Yeah. And so from here, we cut to Anastasia leaving the orphanage. They're 10 years later.
Yeah, the orphanage, which she seems to be having a great time at, and yet the person who runs the orphanage does not like anything or everything. Nice grumpy person.
And so, young, clueless Anastasia has nowhere to go.
She wants to know who she is, but she has a job at the fish canning factory.
And she breaks into song, and
it's a good song, though.
It is a good song. Right before then, a little dog pops out.
Yes, Puka.
And...
Can we have a break to talk about Puka's name real quick?
Sure.
I do not think Puka is a French or a Russian name. So from my understanding, Puka is Irish for an imp.
Okay.
Especially, and it's spelled the same, which is confusing to me because imp would make sense, but why an Irish name for imp?
Well,
the only other thing that I could find is someone. There is another word that maybe they meant to use, which is pushkok, Pushok, I think is how it's spelled, and that means fluffy.
Okay.
And I would like the dog to be named Fluffy, not Imp. Why Puka? Why is his name Puka?
I don't know. It would make more sense if they chose something along the lines of what that character is, because even I didn't really pick up on this. It just seemed like a playful puppy. Don Bluth put the dog in there as a guardian angel character. Yeah,
so why isn't he called literally anything else? Or even a reference to Anastasia's real dog, who I think was named Jimmy. So maybe not Jimmy. But he didn't have a great name. But yeah, no, his name was Jimmy. That was Anastasia's real dog named Jimmy, who died with her. Sad note. Sorry, Jimmy didn't make it. But why Puka? Also, what type of dog is Puka? I have had my husband, who works with animals in a veterinary clinic, look at Puka many times. We have no idea what kind of dog Puka is.
He is a guardian angel dog.
He is a mutt dog.
Yes.
I'm not sure he's all dog.
No, he's not. He's a guardian angel.
Guardian angels have square ears, then.
So, he's the one who guides Anastasia in her song to
St. Petersburg.
Yes.
She decides to go that direction, which honestly I think is a good storytelling aspect, especially for kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's be real here, why does Anastasia have to go work at this canning company? She's 18, she's on her own, and, apparently at this time in Russia, 18 is perfectly fine to be doing your own stuff. She doesn't have any family. Why not? You're your own person. Go to St. Petersburg, girl.
Yep.
Maybe get some new clothes.
And we're also introduced to St. Petersburg's theme song?
I guess we can call it that. I do like the song, but I also don't.
Yeah.
It's very catchy.
It's
a good storytelling use.
It's very Disney-esque.
It reminds me a lot of the song Bonjour from Beauty and the Beast.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Yeah.
But I will say this. It takes a very serious topic that was actually happening at the time. There was a lot of whispers and hushed excitement about the idea of it. Mm-hmm. Maybe Anastasia, maybe her older sister, maybe Alexei not being dead, but you can't talk about it, not with the current political atmosphere.
Yeah, because they knew for a fact that the Tsar and the Tsarina were dead.
Yeah, that had been released to the public.
But
they didn't say anything about the kids, though. I think they might have even lied and said, no, the kids are fine.
I mean, I can see that, but I know the reason that they killed the entire family was because they didn't want sympathizers.
Oh, for sure.
Even if there was a child that was still alive.
Well, and then on top of that, the reason for all of the secrecy from my research in the history of this was if there was a body, they could have been put into the church as like a saintly figure, which would have defeated the current political agenda. If you had the old Tsar as now part of your church, that's a little problematic for your new government strategy. So the fact that all of them, no one knew exactly where they were, where their bodies were for this whole time period. While this song is fun and little kitty and a little bit bland, arguably, I do think it hits on this point in a nice kid-friendly way.
I wouldn't say bland, I would say generic. Because it's definitely generic. Not bland.
No, it's a good song. It is a little generic.
Yes.
I'll give it that.
But this is also where we're reintroduced to a older Dmitri.
He still looks like he's from New York City, I'm not going to lie to you.
Yes, Dmitri and Vladimir.
So, and I did some looking into it because it bothered me a lot. And you're not a Don Bluth aficionado.
No, I've only seen couple of the Fievel movies, Land Before Time, and you had me watch, what was the one we watched?
Did I make you watch,
It's the one with Princess Dipshit and Princess Dickhead Haircut.
Okay, yes, I think I made you watch Thumbelina.
Thumbelina,
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so Don Bluth is phenomenal at drawing background characters and giving each one of them, and I say Don Bluth, I mean like the whole company. Because I know there's lots of people working on these. But their background characters all have individual personalities and clothing choices and faces. His main male leads suffer real bad from same face syndrome.
It's the same haircut.
They're all the same character.
Dimitri has the same haircut.
Yeah, it's a little bit...
Prince Dickhead from Thumbelina has it.
It's real, yeah, it's not good.
And the prince from the Bartok spinoff has the same haircut.
His covered his eyebrow. How dare you, sir?
It's the same goddamn haircut.
It is. I like the idea, though, of the Bartok spinoff, which is arguably the sequel to this movie. And if you ever get a chance to watch it, it is a funny, quick, like, kiddie movie. It's not necessary, though.
We'll talk about it a little bit at the end.
Good, because I have much to say about the DVD of this movie. But... I like to pretend that is arguably, Anastasia and Dimitri's child, and that's why he has that hair. But in reality, Don Bluth had horrible ability to animate men.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, they're just all the same.
Yeah.
They all look strikingly like the main character in the first Mummy movie.
Yeah.
No, that is the character. They have the same accent.
The high and tight and long bangs.
Yeah, and like parted straight down the middle. Kind of how my hair looks like if I get out of the shower. Which isn't a good look. It's not pretty.
They have the, what's his name?
Asshole pretty boy look, really.
The same haircut as the dude from Resident Evil 4.
Oh, yeah, it is the same haircut. Yeah. Yeah, no, they all look the same, so we can just gloss right over Dimitri as just kind of a human being, really.
Whereas Vladimir, arguably...
I like Vladimir,
but he...
feels like a good uncle.
Character-wise, I love him.
Oh, yeah.
Voiced by Kelsey Kramer.
Yes.
Which,
great
job.
Yeah, this movie surprisingly had a lot of big names in it. So other things that you will have recognized their voice from is like Winnie the Pooh, Mrs. Potts.
Meg Ryan was the voice of Anastasia.
Who apparently she didn't really care for how her character looked. I can see that.
Yeah.
I understand. I think Anastasia's a cute character, but I can see how you might be a little upset.
Yeah. Well, Don Bluth did mention that he thought Vladimir was too cartoony for the movie. He was a bit...
I can see that. He is a very round-shaped character. You know, got the round nose, round cheeks, round stomach. But I like him.
Yeah.
He brings a nice dynamic to the very stick-thin everybody else.
Yeah, because honestly...
There's not a lot of shape going on here.
Anastasia has no memory, so her personality is just kind of...
She is as blank as a Mary Sue in a fanfic.
Yeah, and... Dimitri is very straightforward kind of character.
Dimitri's every love interest in a Mary Sue fanfic. Let's be real here. But it works because of the side characters, like the newfound uncle, who I love very much.
Yes. So, Anastasia is also in St. Petersburg now.
Yep. She's decided she's going to go to Paris. Her necklace told her to.
That's right. So,
and then she gets told no.
Well,
I like that, though. I think that's funny.
Not only that, but she needs money to go. So she's trying to find a job, and they're telling her that, hey, there's a guy who's looking for actresses.
And another fun little bit that they did bother to put in, during this time period in Russia, you couldn't just go for funsies overseas. You had to have a reason to be going overseas. So you had to have a specific passport to go. And so, she has no money, so I don't know, yes, dumb on her for not having money to go overseas. I don't know why she thought she could just go to Paris.
But isn't that how all orphans are released, with no money and free reign?
I hope not.
No, God, no.
I hope not. But, she's also told that she needs a specific passport to go to Paris. And so a kind, creepy old lady on the streets informs her that she should find Dimitri, because Dimitri can get her not just to Paris, but he can get her the papers to Paris. And because she's an orphan, I think it's probably going to be way harder for her to get these papers legally. Is it impossible? No. Could Anastasia have gone to Paris legally? Probably.
Yeah.
She didn't, though.
No.
It's fine. Little identity forgery is not that bad.
No. And so, also at this time, she goes to the castle. She kind of remembers there's another...
Oh, the most phenomenal song in the whole movie. Once Upon a December, while not being the song that won this movie awards, for some reason, is by far the one everybody remembers. Yes. This is the equivalent of Let It Go, but for Anastasia.
Yes. And probably, honestly, one of the cooler scenes, too, is as she's singing, she's walking in the ballroom that we saw from the very beginning.
Yes.
It's now not glistening, it's somewhat dilapidated. And the ghosts start to come out of the portraits and dance with her.
Yes, it's a beautifully done scene. And I think a really nice way of acknowledging that memory problems are not just a click, suddenly I remember everything. She is starting to remember bits. And honestly, I think if she had stayed in the castle long enough, she probably would have figured all this out by herself. But she doesn't. She meets Dimitri, who is a dumbass, and kind of tricks her into going to Paris.
Because they're the best she's had, and what was it? There's one line she says that makes him actually think that she could be the real Anastasia, even though she's blank. But that's also perfect for them because she's a blank slate.
She's a completely blank slate, and the way they lie to her, it ensures that Anastasia thinks they're going on just like a maybe good term. There's no repercussions for this. She's not lying. She's going to find herself.
She doesn't know that there's money involved.
No. Girl hasn't picked up a newspaper in a long time, apparently.
And so they've decided, oh, okay, we're going to take this girl. We're going to go to Paris and we're going to try and get her aunt to recognize her.
Yes.
And so also at this time, we are introduced to Bartok.
Oh, Bartok. Bartok is arguably one of my favorite useless side characters ever created for an animated movie.
He checks the mark of talking, almost annoying side character.
He is definitely an annoying side character, but because he is drawn as both very cute, but also a balding middle-aged man, he somehow stands out above the rest.
Well, and on top of that, so the original intent for Bartok was he was supposed to be this wiry, nervous little bat.
I could see how that could work.
And they got a bunch of people to try and voice it. They were doing these high-pitched voices. It wasn't fitting. And then the guy that they had that eventually did voice Bartok came in. And he's like, well, let me do it a little bit differently. And he just had this kind of matter-of-fact, laissez-faire attitude. And
rambly. So freaking rambly.
Bartok
does not shut up.
I do enjoy Bartok because he is what we are becoming.
Oh yeah, no, Bartok would have been a great podcaster.
Oh yeah.
But I also appreciate Bartok because while I think most villains don't need a sidekick of any kind, or if they do, they need to be like Ursula's Eel's sidekick, where they're not really in the story, they're easily forgettable, you don't need them. Bartok is the only thing that is what we get close to a narrator for this movie.
He's very much so the comic relief of the movie.
Oh, also the comic relief. But because we are dealing with the villain through the whole movie is dead. They show him dead in the first minute and a half of the movie.
Yes, and the reason he's able to come back is because one, Anastasia's still alive, so his curse is still going.
Which I have questions about how this curse works because she's never been dead. So why now? Why is it because she's remembering? I don't really get it.
And also his reliquary is still active. It still holds his power. He still has, not only has his curse not been fulfilled, but his magic isn't completely depleted.
No.
So his spirit is still somewhat there.
Yes.
And it's kind of cool because we're transported through this ether of just stuff.
As my husband put it, the fuck are we watching?
Yes.
But because we're making the poor senseless bat go through to get to purgatory / the underworld, it works. It is a fun blur of every possibility that one might conceive of to get to the netherworld. And then because Bartok doesn't ever shut up, we now know A, about the reliquary, A, about the curse, we know about Rasputin, where he's been this whole time, all because this character can't stop talking.
Yes.
And as annoying as some people will find that, it's a really effective storytelling method.
Yeah, no, I mean, they just gloss over a bunch of different things. Oh my goodness,
yeah.
And Rasputin, voiced by Christopher Lloyd.
Yes.
Oh, Doc. But, so, we're also introduced that, hey, Rasputin can come back now because he has his reliquary. That's what happened. He left the reliquary behind, and that's why he couldn't come back. Stuck in the Hellverse limbo.
I also think this is one of the parts where Don Bluth's not being Disney shines through. At no point do they even pretend that Rasputin is not rotting corpse.
No, his head falls into his chest cavity.
My husband was very upset about that because the way it fell in, Brian was not... He was like, no, that's not how that would work. It'd be inside out, at least. And I was like...
It's cartoons, Brian.
It's fine. At one point, his mouth slides down his face. Is really nasty.
His eye pops out.
Oh, that just popped right out there, sir.
Oh, Bartok.
Oh, Bartok. And so... While I know Disney has done nasty dead villains before, I think the only one who's gotten as spooky gross would be the Horn King from The Black Cauldron.
Which I still haven't seen that yet.
But Disney also kind of buried that one right under the rug. They're like, oh no, that's a bit spooky. Oops, our bad.
Oh, too spooky for me.
And while Rasputin is scary, I still think Horde King wins out as by far most nightmare-inducing creation ever for children. He's a close second.
Yeah.
He does get a fun little villain song, which is not the best villain song.
It's kind of forgettable.
It is. It's a good beat, but it's by no means Scar's anthem of Be Prepared.
And I remember Don Bluth and the other guy talking about how, like, that was one of the hardest things to animate was the bugs. How do you animate the bugs? Because they're... Yeah. That's really what I remember most about that scene is...
The bugs. It was a difficult scene. Did they do a good job? I think it works.
Yes.
I think it's fine. But I do think that there was a lot of angles that they could have picked to maybe up the spooky factor. But, you know, it is what it is. It's already made.
Yeah.
No going back now.
And so, at this point, we're also... They're back on... They're on
the road. Yeah, They've got their buddy-buddy song.
Yeah, we cut to the trio.
They're working on getting her to be a princess, which I think is funny, because arguably, they might have had better luck not teaching her how to be a duchess. They arguably would have been better off just being like, all right, time to go. You're this weird orphan girl. That's who you are. We're not going to make you pretend to be a duchess, because if we do, we're just going to be competing with all the other fake Anastasias.
Yeah.
But they don't. They teach her how to stand up straight and hold a teacup and dance. And there's a fun little song about how learning to do things. And, you know, we move on and finally get on a boat, which is much more important.
Yeah. And, I mean,
It's not a bad song.
No.
And it is a good buddy road trip song. And it does help pass time for the movie. It's just not a rememberable song.
No. And at this point, we're over halfway through the movie, and we finally have arguably the first conflict with Rasputin.
Yes, I would agree with that.
He tries luring her off the boat. Dimitri grabs her.
I do think that the way that they decided to use Rasputin's powers was a fun idea. Because instead of having him jump straight in to try and kill her himself, he does attempt to do it from his comfy confines of hell.
Yeah.
And so he gets her to dream sleepwalk off of a boat. Which, not a bad idea.
No.
He was real close. He could have done it if he just, not turned into a scary demon devil halfway through.
Yeah. And at this point, Anastasia and Dimitri, there's a spark that's ignited.
Of course there is. Why would there not be romance in this movie?
Because as much as Don Bluth is anti-Disney,
there is something to be said for the formula.
To be fair, like you mentioned, this was more of his commercial works.
Yes, arguably this was his most Disney-fied work. He admits that this is, him following that formula much more heavy-handed than he ever did before. But I also have an argument for why Dimitri and Anastasia are now romantically together. And I think this could have been part of Don Bluth's grand design, because he is very good at this whole background grand design with research. So there was, in real life, there was a lot of people who claimed to have been the lost Princess Anastasia. One of whom was named Anna Anderson. I think she also had another name. She went by a lot of names. She was in and out of asylums for most of her life, but she was by far the most convincing Anastasia. So much so that a lot of people legitimately thought that it was her, including Anastasia's old tutor.
Yeah, I do remember her, and that's part of what kept the legend alive, that she could be out there still.
A lot of people declared that she was definitely her. Even people who knew Anastasia in real life said that they had a lot of similarities, which is impressive because it sounds like this woman in real life never actually met Anastasia. But part of her story and telling of how she escaped that night was that, and we found this to be true, this part real quick, the daughters of the Tsar had sewn the family jewels and necklaces into their nightgowns, and so when they were shot, a lot of the bullets bounced off because they had sewn so much jewelry into their nightgowns.
They had it the worst because the Tsar and the Tsarina died instantly.
Yes.
But because they did that, all the children lived, and so they ended up shooting them point blank in the face.
Yes, but this was after a very bad firing squad attempt. So they unfortunately were not a quick and painless death, but because of that fact of truth, this woman, Ann Anderson's lie about being Anastasia did hold some water there.
Mm-hmm.
And her story was that she had been shot and her jewels had protected her, and so she pretended to be dead. And a soldier who had fallen in love with her rescued her, and then later the two of them were lovers. And that part is true. She did have a lover who was a soldier at the time,
mm-hmm.
who arguably could have been part of that firing squad. Was she actually there? No, not at all.
No.
But because of that tidbit, and a lot of people think that the movie Anastasia that we're talking about is more based off of this woman, Anna, than actual Anastasia.
Because not only were they shot, they were taken to a mine, they had sulfuric acid poured on them.
Oh, they were very dead.
And then they were buried.
Oh, no, and then they threw grenades in the mine shaft.
Did they?
Yeah, he threw a couple grenades in there just to make sure they were dead. And then he came back a couple days later because he was like, mine shaft, not a good place to hide bodies. Gotta bury him a couple ways down the road. Also,
it would have been a bad image for the rising communist political party if it had gotten out that they had killed the entire family, including the children.
Yeah, and on top of that, part of the reason why he went to such extreme lengths was because the family had charmed most of the guards into legitimately liking them, and a lot of the guards after the fact, when interviewed much later in their lives, admitted that they kind of wish they had helped them escape or had done something about it. I mean, too late now.
Yeah.
But because his guards were so enamored with the family, he had a hard time getting his guards to keep their mouths shut. And if everyone knows where the body of the Tsar and his children are, it's kind of hard to say that they're missing or maybe alive.
Which is kind of crazy, because part of the reason they were all in that mess is because they kept the kids' hemophilia such under wraps, and really only they and Rasputin knew.
Yes. And so, in real life, I think that tie-in fits with animated Anastasia and Dimitri's relationship much more nicely. And while most of this movie is not based off of real Anastasia whatsoever, I do like the tie-ins that one can pull if you dig a little deeper.
Yes.
Which I feel is a little bit more rewarding for those of us who bother to do crazy midnight research on Romanov family.
Yeah.
But let's be real, we're not the only ones, because now there's a whole TV show about the Romanov family. So this family has enamored the public, and not just in Russia, but across the world, for ages now. And so the idea of people being out here armed truth sleuthing it, I think fits. And I think Don Bluth arguably would have been a smart enough man to put in these tidbits. He would have known who Anna is.
Yeah. So back to the movie. So at this point we arrive in Paris, and we have a scene almost out of the Triplets of Belleville.
Oh, yes. This is fantastic.
We're introduced to all the upcomers or all the fashionable people in Paris.
Yes. I also like the new characters we get to meet. So we get to re-meet the Grand Duchess, who is her grandmother. And she is drawn and acts in such a way that you could easily see her as a real-life person.
She reminds me a little bit of Professor McGonagall.
Doesn't she?
Yes.
Doesn't she? But then she's offset with her cousin / arguably lady-in-waiting, Sophie. Sophie is another circular-shaped character.
She is very well endowed.
She is a little cartoony.
But she fits Vladimir very well.
She does. And while she is cartoony, I think she's a nice balance, because the Duchess is, with the exception of, I think, 2 scenes that she's in, is always shown as being very solemn, almost grieving, without the full-on dramatics. Whereas Sophie is a bouncy, happy, young woman.
Yes.
And because the two of them are so different, yes, Sophie is horribly cartoony looking, but she works.
Yes.
And she very nicely contrasts everyone else.
And also we learn that
part of the reason we're going to Russia into Paris is for Miss Sophie herself.
Yes. Dimitri is very much in love with her.
Not Dimitri.
Not Dimitri. Vladimir.
Vladimir. And they are a cute couple.
They are. And we also learn that the Grand Duchess is not going to see anyone because...
No.
Grandmama.
Grandmama. And this is something that there's some debate historically on whether or not the real Grand Duchess Marie truly thought her family was still alive. She never offered a reward, but a lot of accounts did say that she always held out hope that her family was out there somewhere. Yeah. Which, I mean, can you blame the poor woman? But I do like this idea that we, not just for a storytelling point of view, but from a realistic point of view, it has been, 10 years in the movie since this horrible incident.
Mm-hmm.
And this woman has lasted 10 years, and for 10 years had to endure hundreds of fake Anastasias.
Worn out actresses who are just trying to have one last go.
Yes. And so I think this is one of animated film's more... this is a place where animated films arguably could have not put this in, but showing the grandmother's tiredness of emotional tiredness of having to deal with all the fake Anastasias, I think makes the Grand Duchess an incredibly real feeling character. More so arguably than anyone else in this movie.
Yeah. No, they really did a good job. I feel, especially with the upcoming parts, they did a fantastic job with.
Oh my goodness, yes. She is arguably my favorite character other than middle-aged Bat.
Bartok.
Oh, Bartok.
So, from here, they have to take another course of action.
Yes.
They basically kidnap and ambush her from the opera.
Sophie makes a note that, and I think it could have gone differently if Dimitri wasn't so hot-headed. So, during Anastasia's interview with Sophie, who Sophie now has to screen everyone before they go to the Grand Duchess, which is, fair.
Yeah.
So during that screening, the obvious question that everyone should have seen coming was asked, well, how did you escape? And Anastasia managed to answer it correctly, because magic, she's the real Anastasia.
She remembers Dimitri.
She remembers Dimitri, but not really. But Dimitri, who never had amnesia, is stunned. He now has the realization that this is definitely Anastasia, and he's had a change of heart. Now he must get her to her family no matter the cost. It's not about him anymore, theoretically.
And also, one thing to point out, fashion-wise about this movie.
Yes.
Anastasia was, or Anya as she's called in the movie. We've been calling her Anastasia because we know she's Anastasia, but she calls herself Anya. She was actually styled after Sleeping Beauty, but her gown and everything was styled after Audrey Hepburn.
That makes a lot of sense. Especially for the time frame, Audrey Hepburn's style would have been very chic and cute and popular. So yes, I like it.
So, we have the Grand Duchess kidnapped. She's forced into meeting Anya.
Dimitri is a dumbass and can't just, wait for her to try and leave the opera to then have her meet Anastasia. No. He must kidnap her. And Dimitri has the only thing that keeps him from being arrested for kidnapping is that he still has the music box, which is designed to look like a jewelry box, which is part of the gig. He was smart enough to keep that because the whole reason that Anastasia in the very beginning of the movie ran back to her room to go back into the fire, back into the arms of death, was to get that stupid box.
Yes, and also at this point we have the main romantic conflict.
Yes.
Not only do we have the conflict between Anastasia not being able to rise up and become the true Anastasia, but also she learns Dimitri's not exactly a nice guy.
I like how this argument plays out, because a lot of times in, especially kids' animated films, the lady main lead, while she might get to be furious, is usually thrown over a shoulder like a sack of potatoes and forced into understanding the male who is completely correct's point of view. This time, she, while from our point of view, maybe acted a little harshly, she does handle herself in a realistic sense. A very well placed slap and a huff and puff away.
Yep.
And he doesn't get to say anymore. It was a very realistic fight.
Yeah, no.
Which I liked. You don't get to see a lot of realistic fights in animated movies.
Yeah, they did a good job with it. And also, we do get that meeting with her and the Grand Duchess.
It's a very touching scene.
And so that's when she tells of the escape. And she's like...
She has little bits of memory here and there. She does, they have a wonderful embrace. Again, the Grand Duchess's drawing and her voice acting are incredibly realistic. You feel true empathy for this woman. It's very touching.
Yes.
So cute.
And also, we're given a kind of an eye-opening part to Dimitri, because he denies, the Grand Duchess is holding a big ball to reintroduce her granddaughter to the world.
Celebrating, we're so happy.
Vladimir is back in his old position.
That, and he steals Puka's medal.
And Dimitri says, no, I don't want the money. I'm just gonna go back.
He very classic animated movie style informs the Duchess that the only thing he wants is something that she can't give him. Which normally I feel is a horrible and cheesy line. But I think for this specific instance, it ties in with the Duchess's decisions later so nicely that, like, it helps validate her decisions later. Yeah. Because otherwise you'd be like, girl, you just lost your granddaughter again. But because I think part of this works out. Yeah.
And so Anastasia is now doesn't know what to do.
No. She's torn between staying with her grandma in Paris. She's very, like, she admits, like, I'm the happiest I've ever been being with you, but there is a piece missing.
Yeah. And at this point, we have the absent antagonist, the goat of St. Petersburg.
Yes.
Rasputin.
Oh, Rasputin.
Descends again.
I like, so he lures Anastasia out via Puka barking through the maze. And the maze part I like a lot. The whole hedges growing, the bushes moving, that is good spooky Paris vibes to me.
It's a very The Shining moment.
It is. And then we get onto a bridge. Now, if you're not an architect, you are not forced to learn about this stupid bridge. You and I were architects, and so I appreciate the fight on this bridge. I think a normal person would be like, this is a horrible background for a fight.
And even then, like...
It's kind of... They picked the boring bridge, I'm not gonna lie.
It's also symbolic, because that's where Rasputin died, that's where she lost. They're now back to square one.
They're back to square one, and, like, if you know about Paris from a land point of view, you can make a lot of symbolism with the bridge, and the statues that were accurately drawn. Those are actually what they look like. The bridge is very accurate, and you could appreciate the importance of this bridge. However, if you were not forced to study Paris for an entire semester in college, the background's a little boring.
Yeah. And honestly, this end is rather anticlimactic.
Yeah, like, it really is. I like the stomping part, but Dimitri fighting a giant stone-winged horse,
Yeah, because this part they were trying to decide on how violent do they want Anastasia to be.
Yes, and I see where they could have gone. And I also think that they had to toe the line, because this was the film that they actively chose to make more Disney-esque. They had to toe the line between Rasputin meeting his death again via the river, but they'd have to show him actually dying. They couldn't do the whole slip back into the water thing, because we just proved that he's not dead.
Yeah.
So they balance it out with Anastasia breaking his amulet thing, which makes him melt, turn into a skeleton, shimmy, and then burst into dust.
Yeah, and they mentioned that they felt that was rather bland themselves, and they were running out of time and money and couldn't do anything grander.
And while I agree that, especially having seen all of Don Bluth's other films, this ending isn't his typical ending, I will say that there were many a child that I remember being friends with who were genuinely spooked by the skeleton imagery.
Spoopy.
It was very spoopy, especially the melting part. That was not comfortable.
Yeah.
But because I have seen Don Bluth's abilities, I understand what he was saying in his interview, where he was like, "Yeah, it could have been better." Yeah, for his standards, it could have been better. By other people's standards, no, pretty solid.
Yeah. So, and after this, we're back at the party. Anastasia has left a note for the Grand Duchess. She and Dimitri have...
They've eloped. How cute. In the city of love. Adorable.
And she doesn't plan to become a princess because that's not who she is anymore.
No. Well,
in a way, she's discovered her past, but she's also discovered who she actually is.
Yes.
She is not a princess.
She is not a princess. Except she is, because Disney now owns this. But...
Okay. I've had this debate with multiple people, and I think we've come to a conclusion that it's only a Disney princess if Disney actively made the movie. Or it was a Disney-owned company at the time. Because technically, Scully is a Disney princess then.
I would be okay with that.
I would be okay with it too, but it seems like the definition that best appeases people.
I agree it best appeases people, but there's one glaring loophole. Princess Leia is an active Disney princess. She's in their theme park. Disney didn't own it when she was made.
But they've made 3 movies with her in it.
She's dead for most of them.
No? Have you...
Yeah, no, the actress is dead.
Actress is dead, but character-wise.
Yeah. I don't know.
It's a tricky one.
I think the Leia that they're portraying is not the sweet older lady who I love very much. I think she's the young one with the buns, and that's not Disney.
Oh, them buns.
Oh, them buns. No. Well, the other argument is that technically Anastasia wouldn't be a princess, she'd be a duchess. Yeah. So, I also think that this ending works in a different way than a lot of Disney's endings work, with the exception of Shrek. But the reason this ending's different is because normally we sail off into the sunset, we enjoy our couple being together, and we get a very finalized ending. This ending, if we go back a couple scenes, there's a very touching scene where the Duchess is emotionally hugging Anastasia and explains to her, "Look, you have brought me joy that I've never thought I felt before. This has been the most important, fulfilling part of my entire life. But I know that you're alive now. Yeah. And if you want to go out and pursue this new love of yours, I'm not going to stop you. But I want you to write to me." Yeah. Like, she makes it clear that she doesn't expect to leash Anastasia to her side and have her as her pet. Yeah. She wants her to be her own person, and I think the ending to this movie amplifies that a little bit, because at no point does Anastasia make it sound like we're gone forever. The ending doesn't make it sound like we're gone forever. It just sounds like, hey, we eloped. We're on our honeymoon. We'll see you in like a week.
We also skipped over that we learned that she learns that Dimitri didn't take the money.
Yes, no, the fight is over. We're back in love. I'm sure there will be a fight later. Is this a good match? Arguably no. But he's the only male that she can marry in this movie, so here we are.
And so there's a few things with the movie being concluded that I kind of want to have a little discussion of. Sure. So Rasputin's role to me is odd in the movie.
It is. I agree with you.
And this led me down a little bit of a train of thought. So I honestly feel that it would have been a less magical movie if Rasputin wasn't there. I mean, they still could have made it very they did make it very magical with him barely being in it.
Yeah, no, arguably the most magical part is her remembering shit.
But if they had removed him from honestly, if they had removed him from the opening, of him busting in the party. We still would have had the revolution scene.
Yeah, no, the revolution was coming with or without him.
If they had removed him from the bridge scene, they could have just had Anastasia fall into the river and get washed away.
Or even, like, I don't know, hit or something. Like, there's a lot of ways in Disney/Don Bluth films to get him.
Yeah, and even the first spark between her and Dimitri, that could have been started a completely different way.
Oh, sure.
I just think Rasputin was an interesting antagonist in the fact that how the ending came to be. Because he was a very mysterious figure to the people.
Yeah,
and still in many ways is a mysterious man.
I have questions. How does a man that smelly get so much ladies?
It's the charisma.
Oh, such stinky charisma, though.
And that's even debatable, too, because there are some people who say he bathed a lot. And he really wasn't that stinky of a person. It was just his,
monk persona?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, he's still not my taste, but, you know, he's got to be somebody's taste.
He had the eyes.
Yeah, he did have eyeballs.
Did this
movie need Rasputin to continue, though?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. I think we could have arguably not had Rasputin in it.
Yeah, and
the only reason I want Rasputin is because I think he is a good spooky character.
Mm-hmm.
And the repertoire for good spooky characters in animated films is kind of short. So, you know, I need him for that.
Yeah.
But I also desperately need the Bat. Because despite the fact that we haven't talked about the Bat a whole lot, he is my favorite character.
Yeah.
And while he's not necessarily a plot point, he is the closest thing we get to a narrator. And even though he narrates mostly about Rasputin, and if we remove Rasputin, that goes that narration,
mm-hmm.
I think he could be used to narrate other parts of the movie very effectively.
Yeah.
Granted, the only thing I don't like about the Bat is at the end he gets a girlfriend for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't understand the girlfriend Bat.
That's whatever.
I mean, is it Paris? Is that why?
Oh, Paris, the city of love. But also, it was something that Don Bluth said, is that Anastasia, when she starts singing of where she's going to go, he says that he uses music to take emotion beyond words.
Okay, yeah, fair. I'll give him that.
So, I honestly have almost a serious question in regards to this,
mm-hmm.
and I'm curious, why does American animation and animated films need musical numbers compared to... I know there are American movies that don't have musical numbers like that.
Mm-hmm.
Example, Shrek.
No, I would say All Stars is the theme song for intros.
It has a theme song, but it's not a musical singing glorious moment. Very much. It's not like...
Okay, I see where you're trying to go there. Sure.
But comparing it to arguably the other largest animation is Japanese films.
Sure.
Where Miyazaki doesn't have any animated film,
any musical moments. I wouldn't compare Miyazaki to Anastasia, though. I would say that something like Sailor Moon is closer to Anastasia in who you're targeting.
Yes, but I'm talking about movie style wise.
I think it has more to do with who your target audience is.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and arguably this might be a Western concept, but I know it's a thing in European children lore as well. So does Japanese have this? I think to an extent, because let's be real here, I spend my free time watching children's animation.
Mm-hmm.
But so Anastasia, while the characters are older, and while a lot of our age adults nostalgically
mm-hmm.
love this movie is aimed for specifically girls, but children between the ages of like 5 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
And at that age range, one might argue that learning about complex emotions is kind of their main focus at the moment, and teaching it through song is a much more impactful and powerful way of teaching complex things like love, exploration, learning who you are
mm-hmm.
for yourself, coming of age, than just showing it. And so I would argue that while, yes, Western culture, I think we leave the sing-songy, teachy phase way longer than is probably necessary for children to learn. I would argue that most cultures use song to teach emotion. It just might be that the audience that ends up watching it might not translate across the seas very well.
Yeah.
An example that I think of very nicely, which is an odd example, but it's the best one that comes to my head, would be My Neighbor Totoro, which arguably is for the same age group. And while it doesn't have a sing-along song, it does have specific music that invokes a specific emotion that otherwise the movie would lack.
Yeah, and I mean, Anastasia has music in the background too that brings it about, but
I think the argument I'm making with Totoro is the children in Totoro are shown to be dancing with the music. They hear it at certain points of the movie. And while, yes, I think Western animation does lean pretty heavy-handed into making the characters sing and make it a musical, because, let's be real here, sing-alongs are fun. But I think it's a common trope on how to teach kids, and despite whether or not, movies like Anastasia or Little Mermaid are a good teaching method for these sort of emotions, because let's be real here, Little Mermaid made a lot of bad life choices. That is, I think, where it's based off of.
Yeah. Well, I think it has more tie to traditional or early film, where a lot of films were adaptations of musicals, or they had a music number with them. I've been doing a little bit of research on serialized Japanese movies, and I learned that television took a while to take on in Japan, and it's a kind of marketing ploy, whereas like I kind of see it as really a marketing. The serialization of movies in Japan was like big bringing people in, and the musicals are doing the same thing with American animation.
Oh, sure.
And also, you can get a Frozen recorder. It's also about the nowadays, I would say it's more about the merchandise.
Well, and I think it's also become a standard, because I can't remember off the top of my head which it was, but there was an animated film recently that was supposed to be for an American audience that I watched that did not have as much song as I was typically used to, and it did feel off. It felt sad, if that makes sense. But another thought I have with the song, and this is specifically a Western thing because I have no proof otherwise, but one of my favorite pastimes is to listen to old advertisements, specifically radio and some old TV. And I think it's just a Western thing to sing. I think we're, as much as it might sound strange, especially if you don't look historically at it, I think we're a very sing-songy country. We don't mind being loud. A lot of us don't mind singing in public.
It's a very stereotypical American thing.
Yeah, whistling in public, especially to yourself, is completely normal. No one will look at you weird for whistling loudly. In fact, that's how I find my husband in the supermarket. And I think this is something that has been passed down way before even Disney. The ability for families specifically to entertain themselves by singing is heavily ingrained in specifically American and North American culture.
It's a very folk-timey thing.
We are very folk-timey people. We like songs. We like specifically songs about stories. We kind of always have. That's kind of how we got, the Giant Blue Ox and Davy Crockett. And those are still going on, despite, maybe their popularity not being as high as they once were. But everybody can still sing the Davy Crockett song.
Yeah.
And so, commercials used to be sung, even on the radio.
We have jingles for absolutely everything.
We have jingles for everything. I think part of the reason why Don Bluth films, Disney films, and granted, I think it's become a trope, and so now it's heavy-handed, but I think part of the reason why song, even from the time of Snow White, and from, early Whistling Willie cartoons, we're a singy culture. We like singing.
Yeah.
And so, while, I could see how the amount of singing in American animation would be jarring, especially to, elderly Japanese. I feel like the grandparent age Japanese people might not, it might not be popular.
Yeah. And
I think it's just ingrained in us.
Yeah, no, because I do agree with that, too, because I have I've seen a couple Japanese musicals. I've seen Tokyo Tribe, which is a completely different take because it's very rapid. It's all rap.
Yeah, for those of you who haven't seen it, put it in the same class as Hamilton, but not quite. It's not historically Hamilton, but like similar idea as far as a musical goes.
And I haven't seen Hamilton, so
you would like it.
And
it's right up your alley.
Okay, I'll have to give it a go. But last week I watched new Takashi Miike film that's a musical that I will show your husband someday.
Oh boy.
And it will annoy him.
I'm sure.
The happiness of the Katakuris.
Oh no.
Oh yeah. It's it'll annoy him so much because one, he already doesn't like Takashi Miike.
No, it's not his favorite.
It's not his favorite, but to be fair, he's only seen Gozu, so
arguably not the best one to start out on.
No.
Well, and there's also kind of a generic style of sing-alongs that are popular in Western culture. And granted, we have our variety, but there's not a ton. And I have seen some more modern none of these are historically popular like how we have Broadway, but I have seen quite a few Japanese and Chinese adaptations of things that I do like to a musical standard. And while they're fun, I've yet to see a arguably good one, and they all base themselves off of the Western Broadway style.
Yeah.
And so it might just not be much of a thing over there. I don't know. If anyone knows, I'd love to find out.
I would too. I mean,
I love musicals, but again, like, that might just be the very American in me loving musicals.
And musicals aren't one of my go-tos, but I do enjoy them from time to time.
Yeah. And I think musicals are also one of those things that from early age, you're kind of ingrained with the knowledge of like, oh, the great-grandparents are over, we need to watch a movie? Musical. Always a safe bet.
Whereas I lived away from my outside of my immediate family.
Immediate?
Yes, immediate. So, like, my nuclear family, that was what I was around. So.
Sure. And this also might play part of it. I don't know, but musicals and musical numbers, especially from kids' movies, are all written and designed in a certain way that it's easy for you to remember and sing along with. Arguably, newer ones are getting a little bit more difficult to sing, but like that has yet to stop any child from singing Frozen. No. So I see no problems here. But especially in family situations in America, usually when you're stuck in a car together going from point A to point B, which is never a short amount of time, a solid like historical way that we kept ourselves busy was singing. And even if you weren't normally a sing-songy family, like my family, arguably not a singing-alongy family until we are all stuck in a car together, and then we are going to be singing, or at least listening to musicals. For no reason. We weren't that big into them. It's just what you did to pass 3.5 hours to get to Grandma's house.
And, I mean, I've worked in the theater. I was more on the sound side of things and stage crew. Whereas my mom did a lot of stage work, and then she was acting, singing. My youngest brother was the same. Yeah. So, I mean, I've been around it. I'm just more interested in, I guess, the technical side of things and the art of certain aspects.
And I think this all leads into an interesting question. Is Anastasia a good movie?
Well,
I feel like it's a hard question because we did just rant on it for like an hour.
Yeah. I mean, there's aspects of it, I'll say.
And its successor,
Bartok the Magnificent.
Which, okay, arguably the songs in Bartok the Magnificent are pretty solid. The rest of it, not good.
I want to imagine, and I've told you this already, but I want to imagine that opening scene where he rolls out his cart, he's doing his little show.
It is a cool cart.
And everyone's singing along with him. And all of a sudden, I just imagine it, these people are around this little tiny bat just squeaking away.
I mean, yeah, why not? But, okay, this brings me to my last true point. So Anastasia is a grand example of phenomenal DVD design.
Not just phenomenal. Old school.
Old school DVD design.
Old school family DVD design.
Part of the reason I had a hard time deciding to part with my Harry Potter, the second one specifically, because I had the first one on VHS tape, but the second DVD was because back in the day, your DVD didn't just play the movie. It also had games on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you get a chance to get a hold of Anastasia, specifically the Family Fun Edition, it's a 2-disc set, it is worth every penny. Because the first DVD has your standard stuff on it. It's got the movie. I think there's the commentary on that DVD.
Making of's on the second one.
You know, it's got your scene selection, your language, blah, blah, blah. Fine. You know, nowadays that would be considered pretty, like, fancy because it's got the, like, extra bit on that DVD. The second DVD has an entire rendered, illustration of the palace that you can walk through.
Tells you the history.
It shows you little bits of like detail and what they are and what they truly did back in the day. There's 3 different games to play.
Did you play all 3 of them?
Oh, you know I did.
Did you unlock that secret?
No, I couldn't beat one of the games.
So the secret is just them going into the behind the portrait, going back around the grand ball, and just showing clips of the movie and the portraits.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well...
It's something.
Something. I tried really hard to unlock the secret, and Brian had me convinced I was a crazy person, because I made him play... Granted, 2 of the 3 games are arguably not bad. There's a quiz game, and then there's a doll-style dress-up game. I think that's the one that I didn't beat, because I think I exited it too soon. I didn't get the, like, you did it scene.
There's not a you did it scene.
Okay, then I don't know why it didn't let me win. But one of the games is bullshit.
I just exited out of the game, and I still made it.
Okay, well, I don't know. I played it on my fancy new DVD player, so maybe that was the problem. But granted, you could get to all of this from a screen, like a drop-down screen menu. And it has... as a bonus feature on a completely second movie on it. Not even advertised on the box. It's not like, oh, Anastasia and Bartok the
On the
Magnificent.
back it is, though.
Not even that big, though.
No, it's just it's also just, including...
Well, I mean, granted, is it a good movie? No. Bartok the Magnificent is horrible. I love it. But it's not good.
No. You just get more Bartok, which is the great part.
And you also get Pilaf, the weird pink snake, who is arguably just Bartok in female pink snake format.
Yeah.
I like her. Yeah. I also like the weird witch in that movie, because I found out she's a real... Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga!
Who flies around in a mortar.
And pestle.
Yeah, mortar, and uses a pestle as a weapon.
In this one, she just uses it to fly. No hitting. But, you know, I didn't know who Baba Yaga was, so that was fun.
We could... That's a whole thing to go into.
Yeah, that's a different thing. So, you know, I appreciate the level of effort in DVDs like that, and I am sad that modern DVDs don't bother to put in the time and effort to make an entire palace for me to explore and to listen to people tell me about portraits and teapots, and then have 3 games, arguably one of which is horrible, and I've seen better games on point-and-click children's adventure online for free. But
back to your original question.
Good effort.
So, yeah, back to the question.
Yes.
Is Anastasia a good movie?
That's a hard question, because parts of it are phenomenal.
So, you are very nostalgic about it.
To an extent, yes. But I also don't remember watching this movie a ton as a child. I think I watched it a little bit. Most of my memories of this movie are from college. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that there are parts of this movie that are phenomenally done, and it's those parts that Don Bluth and his studio shine through. The Duchess being one of them. Mm-hmm. Her animation is phenomenal. The scene of Once Upon a December, beautiful. Absolutely well done. The level of effort for the CGI and the skinning textures, great. Looked phenomenal.
I will say that did look phenomenal, but it is a little dated at points.
You're supposed to watch it on a smaller screen, I think. Mm-hmm. It doesn't read real good on the super big TVs. My TV also has this habit of filling in frames for me.
It's because your husband does it for video games.
Yes, he does. By the way, Bartok the Magnificent looks real bad with that feature on, because it just adds in whatever it wants. It wasn't pretty. So, like, with modern TV technology, does this movie hold up and, like, visually? Not all the time, no. There are parts where the mouth animation, because my TV's filling in bits, the mouth looks separate from the rest of the face. There's a couple of scenes where the gowns aren't flowing like they're supposed to, because, again, my TV's filling in stuff, which arguably I could turn that off, but I would also argue that I have watched this film rather recently on a small VHS TV, one of the old ones where you stick the VHS right into the TV. The good old days.
Yes.
It looked much better.
Yeah.
So, like, did this film age well visually? No, I don't think it did.
In some aspects, I feel it's just fine because it's very traditional animation.
It is, and I appreciate all of the handwork that went into it. However, I think because this film got left in the forgotten dust along with things like The Black Cauldron, it didn't ever get that polish that Disney's famous for doing, where they re-release things and they've bothered to go back in and fill stuff in.
Or ruin it like they did in the Cinderella.
Oh, yeah, we don't talk about Cinderella.
Yeah.
But in other Disney movies, they rather successfully, like Dumbo, I think when they re-released it, its animation looked much cleaner the second time it was released, because they bothered to go back through and polish some things. They added a couple more frames here and there. Anastasia never got that treatment.
No, and for me, as being a very cynical adult...
Yes, you are.
I enjoyed the movie.
Yes.
I do have some issues with the characters, and they're very flat.
Yeah.
I think the history around the movie is more interesting than the movie itself.
I would agree with you there. I think if this movie got a redo, even if the story was left the same, even if my complaints of Rasputin are left the same, if they did this movie with live actors who could actually do a Russian accent, because that was a huge complaint of mine, is Anastasia and Dmitri have no Russian accent. Why? Everyone else in this movie has a Russian accent. Granted, some of them are not good Russian accents, but they break you from the Russia part of this movie, which was part of the reason a lot of us liked it as kids, was because it wasn't standard European. It was somewhere that we had never even thought of before. It was this magical other country that we didn't know anything about. We didn't know that this was based off of real sad events.
Yeah.
We just knew about this fantastic princess from another world who dressed differently than all of our other princesses. Granted, not that differently, but enough differently that a lot of us had something to look at and to be interested in. And so if this movie was redone with live actors who could actually do a Russian accent, even if nothing else changed, I think it would improve the movie.
Yeah. I don't know. For me, again, there's visual aspects I love. I love the hand drawing. I love the animation.
I like his character ideas. I think some of them didn't execute correctly.
Yeah,
but some of them were great, like Sophie.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of wish there was a little bit more to the movie. And again, I mean, this is my common complaint with many children's movies, as we've discussed, is that...
This is why I'm not going to make you watch Saw and Princess for this. Because, boy, is it flat.
Well, and that's the thing, is we've seen children's movies that are deep, that do it very well.
Yes, I think this movie got really close to being what you wanted, but because our two main characters were cardboard cutouts, I think that's part of the reason that it feels flat. Yeah. Anastasia, other than being dipsy and amnesiac, doesn't have a personality.
Don Bluth is good with making princess dipshits and prince dickheads.
Arguably, his real skill has always been his animal movies. His Fievel characters all have personalities and emotions and characteristics. He struggles for the most part to make his main characters both something that the children feel like they can be projected into, which is arguably what you want out of your princess. You want someone that the kids can put themselves in her place.
When you said projected into, I imagine someone just throwing a children into the TV.
Yes, but I think the Disney formula nowadays is to give a princess enough character that she's distinct from the other princesses, which I think is why a lot of people aren't a big fan of Snow White. She was too bland.
Yeah.
But again, first time princess. And part of the reason why the princess from the movie Brave is arguably not as big of a fan favorite is because it's hard to see yourself as her unless you were very closely filled with her. Mm-hmm. There's two extremes, and Disney likes to play nice and safe in the middle. And Don Bluth, on this occasion, was attempting to copy that.
Yeah, and bringing up Brave, I feel that movie is better seen as not a little kid, but as a more pubescent
It's a
child.
good coming-of-age story.
Yeah, especially for a mother-daughter relationship.
Oh, yeah. It deserves its own podcast.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the dynamic that Disney has set. And unfortunately with this film, it suffered because it was less of a Don Bluth film, and he was going for more of a mainstream, at the time, Disney style. Mm-hmm. And while for some people that was very attractive, for a lot of us that was where the Don Bluth magic ended. Mm-hmm. His characters in Nim were so real and so believable, and they all had very real personalities that were deep.
Yeah.
Whereas arguably a lot of the Disney characters, while they do have a personality, they don't have a deep one until they're given a sequel.
They're still rather cookie cutter.
Yeah. They're given enough of a personality for you to be like, oh no, I'm not a Jasmine, I'm definitely a Belle. But not enough for you to be like, I'm none of them.
Yeah.
Like, you want to be the princess. And unfortunately, Anastasia's too dry.
Yeah.
She got close, but not quite.
No, I completely agree with that. So, in conclusion, what would you actually rate the movie?
I would say that if you are a Disney princess lover and you've never seen this movie, you should definitely watch it. You'll have a great time. That's who this movie's for, is the Disney princess lover. If you have a little girl in your life, she will love this movie. It is phenomenal for that age range. If you are just a casual movie watcher, no, it's not really worth your time.
No.
Instead, I would much more recommend watching something like a documentary about the Tsar family. They are incredibly interesting. All of the characters we talked about have much more depth and history than we got to today.
Oh god, Rasputin was a 3-part podcast of Last Podcast on the Left.
And Anna, or Anna, depending on how you say it, the imposter woman, she is a phenomenally interesting person. Like, she was taken very seriously about this. Like, she married her American husband because he thought she was Anastasia. Like, do research on these people. Read books about these people. They are very interesting. Is this movie going to fill in that hole for you? No. Not worth your time, unfortunately.
No, and even then, I can't recommend... I honestly couldn't recommend this movie. I mean, I enjoy it in parts, but it's not going to be one that I'll pull off the shelf and say, hey, let's rewatch this.
Fair.
I mean, maybe when I have nephews and nieces,
It's a good nephew-niece watch. There are parts that are really, really good.
Just gave me a reason to talk about Rasputin.
Fair. Arguably, though, like, I picked this movie because it's the most well-known Don Bluth film. However, is this the best Don Bluth film? No, by no means. This is significantly worse. If you want a good Don Bluth film, Land Before Time is where you need to go.
Yes. Him and Spielberg. That's when he shined.
Yes.
I would say, if you have both DVDs, pull out Bartok the Magnificent, drink, and have friends over.
Especially if you're like me and you bothered to get through to the 4th Swan Princess movie. Bartok the Magnificent was much better done than the 4th Swan Princess. But if you're not into stupid side character movies, like if you hate all of Disney's sequels, just go ahead and skip Bartok the Magnificent. You'll hate it. It's not a good sequel. If you want a good sequel, go to watch Jafar, the second Aladdin movie. Much better.
Jeez. I don't know any of these sequels.
I love Disney sequels. They're so bad.
Star Wars has kept the tradition.
Oh, yes. Arguably arguably those are better because they at least had a budget and more than 2 people working on it.
But does a budget make it better?
Arguably no, because I would say that Lion King 1.5 was the best sequel ever produced.
So, anywho, this has been The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
Thanks for listening.
Peace.